All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive, honestly necessary shift in how we approach our educational spaces. For way too long, systems have operated from this deficit mindset, trying to quote unquote fix kids so they fit into a pre existing mold. Well, we're flipping that on its head today by exploring transformative equity leadership. This is a framework squarely focused on addressing and fixing systemic injustice, not students. It's a total inside out journey. It demands big structural changes, sure, but also some intense personal reflection. We really have to stop blaming students for the system's failures and start auditing the system itself.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, defining cultural proficiency, then looking at the proficiency continuum, navigating barriers and battle fatigue, tapping into the power of self-care, and finally, exploring love, joy, and community. Let's get to it. Starting off with Section 1, defining cultural proficiency. To really kick off this inside-out journey, we have to establish exactly what it means to look at our work through an equity literacy lens. Take a look at this definition from Geneva Gay. It fundamentally flips the script on traditional teaching. She tells us that cultural characteristics are absolutely not hurdles to overcome, they're conduits. So instead of asking, how do we force these students into our standard mold, we need to be asking, how do we use their unique backgrounds, their lived experiences, and their perspectives as the actual bridge to learning? When you ground academic skills in a student's own frame of reference, that knowledge becomes incredibly meaningful. I mean, it just has a much higher interest appeal, right? It's learned so much more easily and thoroughly. At its core, true cultural proficiency is about honoring who students actually are as the literal building blocks for how they learn. Moving right along to Section 2, the proficiency continuum. Let's map this out into an actionable, visual roadmap that works for both individuals and whole organizations. If we chart our progress on this continuum, on the far left side, you've got cultural destructiveness and incapacity. These are your actions and policies that actively negate or elevate one culture while actively suppressing others. But as you move toward the middle, you hit a pretty tricky zone: cultural blindness and precompetence. And honestly, this middle zone is where a lot of really well-meaning people get stuck. We might recognize our limitations, we might see the glaring gaps in our institutions, but we still struggle to genuinely integrate diverse practices. Recognizing a gap without the willingness to actually change our practices, that often just leads to tokenism. But pushing all the way to the right, that is the ultimate goal: cultural competence and cultural proficiency. This is where you or your organization actively know how to interact with, learn about, and continuously adjust practices to honor all cultural groups. It's not just a badge you unlock one day, it's a highly active, continuous journey. This contrast right here brilliantly illustrates a tension we see every single day in schools. On one side, cultural blindness. It's this well-meaning but frankly harmful path where you hear things like, "We are all equal here," or "I don't see color." It completely ignores existing cultural differences as if they're inconsequential. It pretends the playing field is level when we know for a fact it isn't. On the flip side, we have true cultural competence. Competence doesn't ignore difference, it actually leans into it. It demands that we willingly adjust our skills, our curriculums, and our everyday practices to interact effectively with different cultures. If you want to overcome barriers to cultural proficiency, you have to recognize that this is active, hands-on work. You simply cannot reach proficiency if you're pretending differences just don't exist. Which brings us to Section 3, barriers and battle fatigue. Because let's be real, directly confronting systemic oppression, whether that's racism, ableism, cisgenderism, or classism, brings some serious pushback. Martin Luther King Jr. once wrote that shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. And wow, does that powerful reflection from his letter from Birmingham jail ring true today? It perfectly contextualizes a very specific, deeply draining kind of exhaustion. Think about it. When you're consistently standing up for marginalized groups, some of the absolute most gut-wrenching pushback doesn't come from your overt adversaries. It usually comes from colleagues who claim to be on your side, but who resist actual transformative change because they prefer comfortable surface-level tweaks. You know, the folks who say, "We can't move that fast," or "Let's just not rock the boat right now." That dynamic, constantly fighting for systemic change against a tidal wave of comfortable complacency, is exactly what causes acute burnout and battle fatigue for advocates on the ground. So what happens when critical feedback comes our way, especially about our own blind spots?
To successfully navigate these barriers, we absolutely have to practice these 5 essential commitments. Just imagine receiving some really tough feedback about a classroom policy that's unintentionally marginalizing a specific group of students. Your first instinct might be to defend yourself, right? But your first step actually needs to be to listen. Just listen. Then, make the active choice to believe the lived experience they are sharing with you, even if it totally contradicts your original intent. You validate those feelings, you act on the feedback to correct the harm, and finally, you own your part in the process. Actually practicing these 5 steps intentionally, that transforms a defensive moment into a huge opportunity for equity literacy and building real trust. Now moving to Section 4, the power of self-care. Because attacks on equity efforts are literally designed to drain us, sustaining the fight is absolutely essential. In a landscape where educators are facing active targeting, where local legislatures or school boards might be overtly hostile to equity work, burnout is unfortunately used as a systemic weapon. And because of that reality, these action items aren't just fluffy, feel-good suggestions. They are your strategic armor. The source text makes it a point to explicitly instruct advocates to step away and find unbridled joy, even if it's literally just for 5 minutes, just to reset your nervous system. It tells us we need to schedule weekly intentional self-care. It cannot be an afterthought on a Sunday night. And crucially, we have to build a concrete plan within our locus of control to support our colleagues who are facing threats or pushback. Look, addressing teacher burnout requires accepting a hard truth. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Radical, scheduled self-care is a strategic, non-negotiable necessity if we want to sustain this work. Finally, Section 5, Love, Joy, and Community. Let's explore the incredible, transformative potential that emerges when we prioritize care and sustainability in our schools. We really have to get good at spotting the difference between these two vastly contrasting environments. Manufactured unity, it's sterile. It's a complete illusion of peace where things look calm on the surface, but that calm is only maintained by actively marginalizing, silencing, or policing minority members who actually dare to point out inequity. It basically demands assimilation. True community, on the other hand, is messy, it's beautiful, and it's authentic. And it's only achieved when the most marginalized members of that community feel a deep, genuine sense of belonging, connection, and appreciation. Transformative equity leadership demands that we completely disrupt that false manufactured unity so we can build a true community where every single person is safe and genuinely valued. It really all boils down to this profound truth. The opposite of fear is love, and the fuel for fear is ignorance. When you are doing transformative equity work, fear is kind of a constant companion, isn't it? The fear of doing the wrong thing, fear of community blowback, fear of unmooring the comfortable status quo. But here's the thing. By mapping that fear out, by explicitly naming it out loud, we strip away all those hyperbolic concerns. We can use knowledge to completely deflate the ignorance that's fueling that fear in our communities in the first place. And ultimately, we replace that fear with the transformative absolute power of equity-centered love and justice. The push for transformative equity isn't a sprint. It's a generations-long endeavor. Think of it like a relay race. And right now, you are the one holding the baton. So when you're faced with those long, exhausting struggles, what motivates you to keep going? To whom are you obligated and why? I want you to really take a moment to reflect on your answer to that. Let it ground you and let it fuel your own advocacy in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep pushing for true transformative equity.